What were the Dallas Cowboys trying to accomplish in free agency? And did they get it done? We'll talk about it on this episode of the Locked On Cowboys podcast.
You are Locked On Cowboys, your daily Dallas Cowboys podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Welcome back. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. Joining me today, as always, is Landon McCool. You can follow him on Twitter at McCoolBCB. On today's show, we're going to do some big picture stuff for the Dallas Cowboys offseason. Landon, let's start with free agency. Now that we've seen basically the first, second, third wave of free agency is done. This used to be like a month-long thing, and now it's like 40 hours. What do you think the Cowboys were trying to accomplish in free agency this offseason?
Well, I mean, I think that the goal isn't terribly different than their normal goal, right? That of just kind of getting themselves set up for the draft and making sure that there aren't kind of pressing needs that they don't, they really want to be able to go into the draft, not necessarily without need, but eliminating any spots where it's a dire situation. And I think that really that's the kind of overall goal that they have this time of year. I think the other two big goals that they had were one, re-signing Osa Odighizuwa. I mean, clearly that was a priority for them, and getting him back in the fold and locking down that interior pass rush. I think that we talked about this before, that like interior pass rush is one of those kind of rare commodities that not every team has, like in an individual player, that like it's easy to get. Like it really is kind of a rare thing. Defensive tackles are notoriously difficult to develop, right? And not very many of them come out of the draft kind of ready to go. So getting someone who can be a true pass rusher as an interior defensive lineman, that's like a valuable commodity. And the Cowboys obviously quickly identified that and didn't want to lose that opportunity in having Osa, because there really wasn't a good solution to kind of replacing that, other than throwing a first-round pick, and that is not necessarily a good solution to the problem.
This is why I think we'll get into all their moves. But to me, this was the most important move of the offseason. And I know there's an expectation, hey, you should be able to re-sign your own players. And I understand that. But to re-sign Osa a couple days before free agency and to get him on the deal that they got him on, compared to what was out there on the market, like go look at like what Milton Williams got. That's why I have a hard time criticizing them too much, because I think, Landon, like if you look at the opposite, like if the Cowboys didn't sign Osa, but they signed three other guys at $8 to $10 million a year, I think there would be a section of Cowboy fans that would be excited because they spent money in free agency. But to lose Osa he's almost impossible to replace, not only in free agency, but also the draft, because it takes these guys so long to develop. So I think they started off really, really well by getting Osa done and getting him honestly on a pretty team-friendly contract.
Oh yeah, it's a great deal for the Cowboys for sure. And then I think that the third thing that is, it's hard to like talk about, because it's hard to like, it's like difficult to like put words to what it is, but they do this thing where they improve the depth of their team by like filling the 47th through 53rd guys on your team with like low cost potential upside veterans, right? Like they've done a really interesting job, and they do this every year, of signing like second contract guys who had a high level of, we usually refer to them as the first rounders, right? Like how the Cowboys are obsessed with signing first rounders. But what they're doing with that is they're not signing those guys to come in and be like immediate starters or, necessarily relied upon role players, though some cases they are. I think what they do a lot of times is just they bring these guys in as potential depth pieces. They give you kind of a solid lower middle class to your roster. And if one of them pops, that's fantastic, right? Like they have the pedigree to potentially, see that potential realized with their new team. That's great. Now you can increase them to a new role. If they don't, you still have a guy that's functioning, that's giving, that's a snap eater at a position, right? Like, some of these positions, you just need a body to kind of, occupy snaps sometimes. I think they do a good job of kind of attacking that area of their roster to improve incrementally, and then allowing the draft to be where they're taking the big chunks, the big steps up in the talent of their roster. So I think we'll see some other avenues, right? I wouldn't be shocked to see a trade at some point, maybe even on draft day. But I do think what's interesting is that, we're kind of looking at this through, oh, they're just nibbling around the edges and they're not signing, they're signing cheap deals. I actually think what they're doing is an interesting roster construction thing where they're filling that area of their roster with guys who at least they can give the minimum, the minimum requirement of that position, but with the potential that maybe one of them breaks loose and becomes a much better player than what you're paying them for.
Yeah, and most of the time, I would say these former first or second round picks don't end up panning out on their next team, right? Like that just happens. Whether maybe they were overdrafted or they've had injury problems, it just doesn't cost you all that much. But we should listen, I think the Cowboys do a lot wrong in free agency, but we should give them some credit. They've done a good job of identifying some players. Let's go through some of them. Malik Hooker was a former top 15 pick who struggled with injuries. The Cowboys thought, let's bring him in on a cheap deal, no expectations. And he's been your starting free safety now for 4 years, right?
And this is a position, if anybody is, above the age of 27 years old, they remember the long stretches of time where the Cowboys couldn't get a decent starting safety in this team. So the fact that they were able to get Hooker like that was incredible.
One of the more famous ones, Rolando McClain, for that little bit of time that he was here, which was always so much fun. Time. But I mean, I'll give you another one on the defensive line, Dante Fowler. The first time they had Dante Fowler was a former washout first round pick that bounced around teams. The Cowboys thought, hey, this is a former number 3 overall pick. Let's bring him in and make him a depth player. He was so good that he got a contract from Washington, had double-digit sacks this year. Now the Cowboys have given him more money to come back. So if this is a viable strategy where you could sometimes strike gold and get a high leverage starter and it costs you nothing. But I think for more than any, it's like a scratch off. Like they know 95% of the time they're not going to return their value, but all they need is for it to hit once, like it did with Malik Hooker or like it did with Dante Fowler. And it's worth all those other investments.
And I'll even push back a little bit, because I think if we're talking about getting their value, maybe they don't ever live. Maybe a lot of them, and most of them, don't live up to the promise of being first round picks. That's obvious, right? But I mean, a lot of these guys certainly live up to the contract that they've been offered by the Cowboys, right? Like, so I think that's the thing that gets lost in this a little bit, is that, yeah, it's a low risk gamble to see if they have the upside. But even if it doesn't work out, it's not like you're paying a ton of money for these guys to fill a role that you're going to need to fill with somebody anyway. So I think it makes sense to do it this way. Obviously, we wish that they would maybe take some more big swings in free agency. But I also think that looking at the landscape of this year of free agency, I mean, there was maybe 2 or 3 free agents that you really felt good about the contract they got and their ability to improve your roster. I honestly don't blame the Cowboys for kind of sitting out that first wave of free agency. Now that we're seeing kind of the collateral, roll down, like teams cutting guys in reaction to signing other guys, and the draft will obviously cause a little bit more of that. It'll be interesting to see if the Cowboys kind of gobble up some of the folks that maybe whose contracts get let go on the other side of the draft or at the end of free agency.
I want to talk more about some free agency, because we got news from John Machota today on some targets that the Cowboys had, why they weren't able to bring those guys in. And then some more just general philosophy. We'll get to that next. This episode is brought to you by Upwork. Scaling your business requires the right expertise at the right time. With Upwork, you can find specialized freelancers in marketing, development, design, and more. experts ready to help you take your business to the next level. Upwork gives businesses flexibility by connecting them with top freelance talent across multiple industries, including IT, AI, web development, and marketing. Whether you need extra hands on a project or just maybe a long-term partner, Upwork makes hiring simple and affordable. If you need help with a marketing campaign, Upwork can connect you with a freelance expert who can help you deliver incredible results. Plus, it's so easy to hire. You can post your job for free. It's simple. And within a day, you should have multiple qualified candidates to choose from. Visit upwork.com right now and post your job for free. That is up/work.com, upwork.com to connect with top talent and grow your business today. This episode is brought to you by Gametime. Imagine watching your favorite team live, feeling the energy of the crowd, and witnessing unforgettable moments. There's nothing, absolutely nothing like experiencing a big game in person. But getting tickets to that game shouldn't be stressful. That's where Gametime comes in, making it easier than ever to grab last-minute seats at unbeatable prices. They have the Gametime Picks option. It'll help you curate your options so that you get better value for tickets to your sporting events, concerts, comedy, and theater near you. I just checked the Gametime app this morning for an event that I'm going to go to this weekend, and the deals were incredible. I can't even tell you how good they were. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. That is LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. Lena, I want to just ask you about like a general strategy here. Do you think the Cowboys would be better off if they just set aside a portion of their cap, whether it's 5%, 10%, on just outside free agents? And I know that the strength of the class matters, but I'm wondering if they need to do a better job of actually trying to go out and bring in outside talent rather than just filling the bottom of the roster. Do you think they could really benefit from maybe spending up a little bit more?
I think I would probably prefer to avoid like spending requirements. You know what I'm saying? Because I do think that like as much as we would like to see them be a little bit more aggressive in free agency, I mean, I think we all have to recognize that they aren't incorrect about the idea of getting value in free agency, right? Like free agency is the worst place to get value for talent. Like and again, like even more so now, right? As we're seeing these teams get exploding salary caps, teams are signing their own, and the players that are worth retaining on their roster, which equals team players that are worth having. Period.
Sure.
They don't often make it to free agency, and there are certainly extenuating circumstances, and there are certainly situations in which good players do make it to free agency, but they are the exception that prove the rule more than anything. So I do think that the Cowboys need to be willing to work on the first wave of free agency, and they need to be ready to be willing to strike when the iron's hot, when those opportunities do rise, right? Because again, like it's probably one or two of those situations every year. That's it, right? Where there's like a unbelievable talent that's in free agency that's available that actually fits what you're trying to do. You know what I'm saying? That isn't like, oh, he just came off an ACL. Oh, he's 35 years old. Oh, he didn't produce his last two seasons. Like, and the Cowboys need to be more willing to jump on those opportunities when they present themselves. I mean, I guess like, it's easy to say the Cowboys should have jumped on Saquon Barkley, like, and say that would have worked out. Like, we don't know that that's necessarily the case, but I think that the Cowboys should be more willing to take chances on situations like that, where it's a player who is clearly talented, was in a bad situation. Maybe you can provide a better situation. I mean, clearly you feel that way about yourself if you're bringing in rehash first round picks.
Yeah.
Why not do the same thing with proven players who weren't able to have maybe the success that they should have because they were on a bad team?
So according to John Machota from The Athletic, the Cowboys were more interested in some of the, I don't want to say top tier free agents, but more expensive free agents. And that list included Greenlaw, Cooper Kupp for a little bit, Kristen Fulton, who signed with the Chiefs, and then Charvarius Ward. But they missed out on all of them. They were trying to, I think what they meant by selectively aggressive is they had a couple names that they were going to go hard after. They just didn't get any of the deals done. And this is where I'm wondering if they need to change their philosophy a little bit. It seems like in free agency, they are unwilling to spend a certain amount, right? Like they're viewing a $10 million player as a $10 million player. But we know in free agency, a $10 million player usually goes for $12 to $13 million, right? Like that's just the way free agency is. You're just not going to get values when it comes to spending up on those guys. Should they be more willing to overpay for a player, knowing that it still makes their team better? Or should they continue this philosophy? Hey, we're just going to make sure we never overpay a free agent.
I mean, it's tough, right? We're kind of like, this is like real fine tuning of team building here. Like, I do think that they need to be more willing to overpay, right? Like in situations that warrant it.
Because
right?
At the end of the day, like, let's say you sign Dre Greenlaw. It's not that big of a deal if you're paying him $12 million versus $10 million. I'm just making those numbers up.
Yeah.
Because once we get to October, November, you're going to be happy that he's on your team, and you're not going to be thinking about the contract too much at that point.
Yeah, especially if they're on these kind of shorter deals too.
Yeah.
Like it's like, they'll be off your books in no time with no dead money, really. So, yeah, I mean, I do think that like I said, this is why it's tough to talk about this, because I do think it's like a case by case basis to a large degree. But I would say, if we're talking generally here, yes, I do think the Cowboys need to better understand the idea that if a player is worth getting in free agency, he needs to be worth overpaying for. And even if you really, really want a player, you need to set your spending limit and then understand that you're probably going to blow past it if you really want that player.
Well, and that's the thing is, it feels like to me, they still think that they're going to get like a discount to come play with the Cowboys. And maybe they will a little bit because of the income tax, right? It's okay to lose a deal, but to make your team better. I think that's where I'm at. Now, I don't think you and I are saying, hey, go out and do this for 7 different players.
No.
We're saying like pick 1 or 2 free agents every year where you value them as a $10 million player and you're willing to spend more than that to go get them.
And these are the guys they identified, right? Like if you've identified these guys as these are the guys we want to be, as they said, selectively aggressive. Maybe they offered very reasonable contracts. All of those people that signed those contracts, Fulton, Greenlaw, they all got very nice deals, right? So maybe the Cowboys did offer them a good deal, but it just wasn't enough. I think that's the thing, though. They need to be willing to take that next step. If you actually want this player, if this is someone that you like actually think is worthy of having on your team, is going to make your team better, you need to understand that you're going to offer your best shot. It's probably not going to be enough. You're probably not going to get the discount that you think that you are, just because Dallas may be a destination for this as a city.
Yeah.
But you're certainly got to be willing to, double and triple down if you really, really want to get that guy.
Because how much better would we be feeling about the entire roster if they paid Charvarius Ward the same contract the Colts got him? And now it's Trayvon Diggs, Charvarius Ward, Deron Bland, Kyer Elam. Yeah, you still need a slot corner, but it's like we could figure that out, right? That's why I think it's okay not to do that. Don't do that at every offseason. Don't get into the habit of doing it multiple times every offseason. But I do think adding in 1 or 2 players outside that are like B quality players, B- quality players can really help this team. Really quickly, Landon, before we move on, what do they have left to do in free agency? Because there's still a month until the draft. I'm going to assume they're still going to sign at least a couple players. Where are the spots they need to attack over the next few weeks?
I think we know the spots that are still soft, right? Like they definitely still need a secondary pass catcher. I don't know if that's something that's going to come up in free agency unless there's a trade situation or somebody gets cut that we're really not expecting, right? I think that they certainly could use another body inside at defensive line. I think another big body outside defensive line guy, an edge who could maybe reduce in a little bit as part of a rotation potentially.
I saw John Machota said Calais Campbell could potentially be an option for them.
I mean, that's just the perfect name to hear,
Yep.
right? Like, because
Yep.
he's a guy who you're going to come in and get a high floor. Maybe you don't want to overcommit to, right? You don't want to like pay terms of length, right? Like you want to develop some of these guys, so you don't necessarily want to sign a 4 or 3 year deal with a Calais Campbell. But if you bring him in, right, well, yeah, he's also 38 years old, right? Like that's all the other part, obviously. But he's a guy that can come in, raise your floor, and really, really help, a bunch of your young defensive ends who are also all developing.
Yeah. I think he mentioned also Asante Samuel and Keenan Allen. Two of the other names
makes
are
some sense
circled.
as the nickel guy, right? Like I think he comes in, he could be your nickel guy. Keenan Allen, it's like, I don't know. I mean, how much more does Keenan Allen have left, and what's the difference in what you're paying him versus an upgrade on where Tolbert is at this point? Like, I don't know.
I don't see that one either.
Yeah, that one doesn't make as much sense.
All right, let's talk about the draft. What impact does the Cowboys' moves in free agency have on what they're going to do in the draft? Quite a bit. We'll tell you why next.
The NCAA tournament is here, and so is the bracket breakdown.
Locked On Podcast Network and Amazon Fire TV channels are teaming up to deliver NCAA tournament coverage like never before. Watch studio shows featuring former players and Locked On's local experts as they guide you through every upset, buzzer beater, and bracket matchup.
Stream it all for free on Amazon Fire TV channel. Search Bracket Breakdown to see it all for free.
It's your team every day.
Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. For your second listen, check out the Locked On NFL Draft Show with Damian Parson and Keith Sanchez. Now that the season is over, get the latest draft rankings, rumors, and news every day. Find Locked On NFL Draft on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcasts. All right, Lane, let's talk about the draft now. How do you think what the Cowboys did in free agency or pre-agency, a couple days before free agency, impacts what they're going to do in April?
Well, I mean, the first thing is, as we stated, they kind of have to use free agency to set the table, right? So kind of nibbling at the spots that they have obviously, number holes at, right? Meaning like there's not like a talent problem. There's literally no, at one point there was literally no one playing running back, and there was except for Deuce Vaughn. So you needed bodies at the position. So any of the spots where bodies needed to be obtained, the Cowboys were kind of going around and re-signing their own and signing a couple of cheap free agents to kind of fill that out. You saw that at defensive end. I think you saw it at cornerback. You just needed a couple of different people to kind of come in and be folks who could come in and just give you snaps and not, get you absolutely beat. Not necessarily the talent toppers, right? So that's really the Cowboys have saved all that for the draft. And now what the Cowboys need to do is go in and actually get talent in the draft. And I know that seems obvious, but I think specifically at the spots that they need to get it at, it almost feels like you can only get it in the draft, right? Like, for instance, the kind of secondary pass catcher, I mean, they kicked around the idea of a Cooper Kupp. Obviously Devontae Adams, I think, is a guy who actually probably could have been a serious secondary pass catching receiver that really would have moved the needle on this team. But outside of that, like, I don't know, like, you saw some other Stephon Diggs coming off an injury, some of these other guys that just are, good, but not great, and so I think that's why they have kind of worked around the edges and saved the actual talent improvement for the draft, because I think you can go in there, especially if you were to get somebody in the first round, Golden, Tet, Burton, all three of those guys, should be around at 12 or wherever the Cowboys are if they want to trade back or something. And
Well,
I think
Burton, it seems like every day it's like he's dropping further and further. It's like, hey,
might
44 might be too high for him.
might be able to get him at 44 at this point. I don't know what's going on with that. It's ridiculous. But if you do, that would be the steal.
I saw Todd McShay had McMillan falling to 28 in his mock draft today.
It's crazy, man. Like I don't know if we're all how we're seeing these wide receivers so differently than everybody else, but there's a lot of really talented guys. Anyway, so I think that's clearly a spot where they need to improve that area, and I think if they're going to do so, probably in the first 2 rounds. And obviously there is a big running back shaped hole in this roster, and I think the starting running back, or at least the primary back in a committee. So I do think that the Cowboys also will be going out and getting a running back or 2 in this class to kind of fill out however their running back room is going to work, whether it's, like I said, a primary guy who is spelled with somebody, or if they're going true committee and maybe getting multiple guys and kind of just rotating them in as a platoon. Outside corner is another spot that we talked about that, like, you just have a lot of uncertainty with Trayvon Diggs' injury. You've got another young player in Kalen Carson who you like, but also coming off a shoulder injury, so you just don't really know where that is. So I don't know if you can necessarily rely on him to kind of fill the gap while Diggs is gone. So you may be looking at another outside corner somewhere.
I'll give you
please.
two ones that they addressed in free agency. That'd be defensive tackle. Not that I don't think they're going to draft a defensive tackle, but I think if they didn't bring back Osa and they just signed some run-of-the-mill defensive tackle, like, we'd be hoping and praying about Mason Graham falling to 12, or like we would be talking about having to go up and get Mason Graham. Now, if he falls to 12, I think we have a conversation, but like the fact that they got Osa signed has just taken all the stress out of that position. And the other one is linebacker. I don't love the Kenneth Murray addition, but Jack Sanborn, I think, is a starting NFL linebacker. And now, at least with Maris Leafau, Overshown eventually coming back, you have options at linebacker, right? And I think if they didn't make those, we would be talking about Campbell in round 1, or maybe trying to get Stutzman in round 3 or something. So I still think they could draft a linebacker, but it's gotten pushed down a little bit. We have to mention quarterback as a need because they lost Cooper Rush. They're probably just going to be targeting on quarterback at some point. So I do think free agency has changed there in the nickel because you lost Jordan Lewis. You have to get a nickel at some point in this draft.
Yeah, I mean, we'll see. It does feel like they'll probably give Izzy an opportunity to try that spot, but you definitely need depth if Izzy doesn't work there because he hasn't done it full time, so it's not a certainty.
You need multiple options.
You need multiple options there, and I do think you mentioned Samuel as a guy. I think that could be an interesting guy. I think there's also opportunities for someone to get cut on the other side of the draft at that position. Nickel is also keep in mind nickel is one of those spots too where it's a lot easier to find a nickel corner, a solid nickel corner, than it is a solid outside guy, just because the body types that are required are a little bit looser inside. So, there's definitely still some spots where you feel like the Cowboys have some work to do, but it also feels like they've kind of shaped everything. They've shaped their roster to try to match what the draft will provide for them. So it'll be interesting to see how it plays out.
It sure seems like this draft is setting up well for the Cowboys to get a wide receiver, a defensive lineman, and a running back with their first 3 picks. Not necessarily in that order, but some order, right? And then probably on day 3 is when they fill in defensive tackle, quarterback, maybe offensive line. But I would have to imagine that they're going to leave the second day of the draft with at least 2 of running back, wide receiver, defensive line, right?
Yeah, I mean that seems pretty certain. I would say, especially with all the picks they have, it seems like those are spots definitely going to get hit.
All right, that is it for today's show. We want to thank you for making Locked On Cowboys your first listen of the day. Go check out the channel on YouTube. Download the podcast wherever you get your podcasts. We are free and available on all platforms. Follow Landon on Twitter @McCoolBCB. I'm at Marcus_Mosher, and we will see you right back here tomorrow.